Okay, today we are going to look at the arithmetic test, the level 11 arithmetic test. And so this is what kids should be able to do roughly by the time they finish the first grade of elementary school. And my son was able to pass this test without much issue at the end of his kindergarten year, so before elementary began. Um, just to tell the way first, the main study materials we used were this book. My chroma key is destroying the center of the book here, it seems. And this book just has a bunch of, it's an answer key to a bunch of problems, for shapes, and you can't see that at all. And things like clocks, what time it is, and various word problems. Here's one over here, how many, oops, that's a bad angle. How many of each number appear in a series of numbers 1 to 50? Like how many zeros appear, how many twos appear, and so on. And then we also use this one other book here, which is a word problem specific book for the same subject. So just very similar questions, I would say, but they focus solely on images and words for these problems. So sometimes you'll get longer problems going on. Like even just with these descriptions here, they can get long, and I think that can be tough for kids to do because reading long boring sentences can be time consuming and boring. Take a look and see. Yes, another example of a word problem. If you spilled ink on this calendar here and you wanted to figure out what these days were supposed to be, let me see if I can find a longer one. Oh, here we go. So you see these 2 pages are quite long. So this is a pretty long description of where to turn to get to what street and so on. So I think this one is a good example of a question that you'll just kids will just look at and say, I don't want to do that. It's a long question, which is maybe the one of the biggest hurdles at the early levels in the tests, or the early test levels rather. So let's take a look. First, let's see what the level 11 test is. So you have about 40 minutes, 20 questions, and you need 70% to pass. So unlike the previous the flag test that I mentioned in earlier videos, where we were able to have the take the test with our kid. Most tests, including these math tests here, the kid has to do all the answers themselves. But I was kind of worried about my son. This is, I think, the first test that he ever took at a sort of test center where you actually have to go in and take the test. So I was worried about him. So I actually went with him for this test. And so I signed up for the test myself. The grade 1 elementary test. I got a perfect score, by the way. I don't mean to brag or anything, but so I went with them. We go in the room, and the other parents can accompany their kids to the test room. But then once you go in the room, eventually, before the test starts, all the parents have to leave. So the test people, they came up to me and said, "Oh, all the parents have to leave." And I said, "No, I'm taking the test too." They were kind of surprised because I think that there are parents who take some tests with their kids, but this one, I guess, is rare, it seems, because the test monitors, they'd never seen that before, apparently. So, yeah, the test, what's on the test is roughly 90% things that you will learn in the first grade of elementary, and then 10%, so maybe 2 questions out of the 20 questions, that is a slightly higher level than the first grade of elementary. So, oh, and you see the books down here. They have a few of them. One of them we were looking at. And let's take a look at the example test that they have on the page. So, no calculators, no cell phones, pretty much the same basic rules. The actual test comes in like pages that aren't stapled together. So when my son first opened the test, the pages like kind of fell onto the floor, and things weren't off to a great start at first. But I think the people who monitor the tests, they are used to dealing with the younger children as well for levels like the level 11 here. So they were able to help them pick up those papers and get things sorted out, figure out like what question is number 1, what question is number 2. If the papers are on the ground, it gets tough. So the first 10 questions are simple addition and subtraction. Here we go. So 2 plus 2. If you're in like a George Orwell book or something, you might not be able to do this, but pretty easy, I think, for most people. Kids who have learned their addition and subtraction, most of these aren't so tough. At the end here, we get bigger numbers, 67 minus 2 or 16 minus 8. We have 6 plus 4 plus 4. It's probably also still pretty easy for most kids. And 10 minus 3 minus 6, right? So not too hard, I think. And again, you only need, since the first 10 questions are like this, assuming that you got all 10 of these right, you'd only need 4 more. So this test is pretty easy to get a passing grade. So this is kind of like the one in kindergarten, very similar, the kindergarten level test, which is more and which is less, basically, of these two. And which amount of dots is the same as the amount of castanets here. So again, pretty easy. If you've learned addition and subtraction, the basics of that, you might already have 12 points at this stage of the test. So only 2 more. And then there's a lot of different practice tests. So some of them are actually a lot harder than this one, and the real test too, I think, was harder than this one. This one's really easy, actually, so comparatively, at least. So which one is larger, the big cow or the small cow? Then we have which is the shortest of the trees, right? So okay, at this point, I think if you paid attention and this was the test that you actually got, most kids would probably be passing by already at this point. So let's see what else we got. So now we got a word problem, right? And you have 90 questions total, and a kid did 20 yesterday and 30 today, and then you have some questions based on that. So how many more questions did you do today than yesterday, and how many problems are remaining? So as long as you can like figure out what's being said here, it's not too difficult. But again, these word problems, they can be confusing if you're not really used to them. Like, what are you actually asking me? I think they can be tricky for kids sometimes. All right, let's take a look at the next question. Again, this kind of a lot of words, but the problem itself I don't think is too hard here. So you have these small sticks here, and you also have the longer sticks, and so you got these 3 long sticks. Which shape can you make, basically, with the 3 long sticks? And then we have 2 short sticks and 2 long sticks. Which shape, pick what 2 shapes you can make here. And I think if you get one of the two right, they'll probably give you a half point on the test, but I'm not actually 100% sure if they give you half point or just zero based on that. And then the last problem, again, this is kind of similar to the one that we had on the kindergarten test where we had the blocks in the corner, except this one I think is much higher difficulty. So they're asking you, you have these, I guess, 8 blocks here, and the face on this side, on the one facing us, is green. The face on the right of the image is blue, and the top is red. So, um, so how many of these blocks are going to be red? And you sort of have to like think about this. What happens to the blocks underneath? Are they red or are they not red? And you have to read the question. It says, okay, well, at what point so it says that after after the blocks were put together, they were painted. So the blocks in between would not be red. So then you can determine that it's probably just these 4. And then how many blocks are all 3 colors? And you look at this and you have to think, okay, this one, you probably only have this one block in the corner. And I'm barely even looking at the question. So if I get anything wrong on this practice test here while explaining it, don't be too harsh. So again, I think with the questions that we just looked at on this sample test that they provide here on the site, the last question I think is kind of tricky. I'm basing this on a kid ages like 5 to 7 or whatever, right? I think it would be kind of tricky for them to grasp this instantly because they need to understand the time when this takes place, and then know like the colors and how many blocks there are and everything. So there's like 3 different things that you have to think about when answering this question. The one above, the size of these sticks, I don't think this one was too hard. Being able to select 2 answers here, that might cause a little bit of confusion if you don't read the question properly again to answer 2 of these, right? We go back up. In this one, again, the wording of the problem could cause some confusion, but all in all, I think if you have a little time training these questions, it's not too big of an issue. And all the questions up to number 14 on this particular test that they provide here are, I'd say, quite easy. They're I think actually much easier than the actual test that we took. And my son, we did a lot of practice questions before the test, so he got, I think, 18 out of 20 in the end of the actual test. The final question that they had on the actual test was a little bit confusing because even I looked at it. I'm like, oh wait, what are you asking? And I did think about it for a moment. So it really depends on what questions that you're given. I'm just going to take a quick look in this book and see, what if there's any really tough questions, for example. Like on the practice test that we just looked at, for example, they don't have any any of these clocks. For example, these clocks here. What time is it? So there's no time questions that came up there. But I think we had one on the actual test. Yeah, because in this book of practice tests, I have like 3 different clock questions asking you like what time it is and who woke up earlier, that sort of thing. There's also a lot of easy ones in here as well, though. But yeah, even just the questions at the beginning. 57 minus 6, 19 minus 9 plus 1. Not too hard, but bigger numbers than we had on the other practice test. Let's see. 5 plus 3 minus 6. 6 minus 3 plus 1. I guess well, here's kind of a tricky one. You have to so figure out the patterns of the numbers that I'm not getting a good camera shot of this. It looks like on these in the box, and then oops, okay, over this way. Yeah, I gotta get used to this, and then figure out what is in the boxes on the, I guess would be the right of the screen now, and the top of the screen. And the other numbers that you have are 3 in the left, 10 on the bottom, and 6 right there. So I guess if you can't see the question very well, it's not going to be very helpful. But these kinds of I'll try explain the next one. Like we have one here, a word problem. It says someone took a test 3 times. The first time they got 7 points. The second time they got 3 points less than, or sorry, 3 points more than the first time, and then the third time they got 4 points less than the second time, and then trying to figure out how many points they got each time and everything. So overall, not too difficult, but there can be some confusing wording. I think most kids won't have too much problems with the level 11, especially if they've already gone through the material in school. My son had not at the time, but yeah, he was still able to do it without much trouble. The next level up, though, the level 10, which I think we'll go through a little later, where we start with multiplication and more difficult word problems, is a little bit more troublesome here. Anyway, that's just a quick review of what the level 11 arithmetic test is like, and I think it is a really good base of understanding how to get started with arithmetic. But and the questions, again, they are for the most part easy enough that I think as long as you go through the material a couple times, the kids should be able to pass without any problem. And even just looking at the practice test that they have on the site, if you get lucky and you have the which one is more, which one is less, and the bigger and smaller, taller and shorter questions on the same test, which I actually think is pretty rare. They probably either have which one is more and which one is less, and which one is bigger and which one is smaller, taller, whatever, on a different test. Putting them together seems rare from all the practice tests I saw. Anyway, if you get lucky, you could probably breeze through this test. And if not, it's probably still not too tough. So yeah, good luck. And I think I mentioned in a previous video that my son did not actually pass the level 10 yet. We actually got the results back just the other day, and well, I'll talk about that in that video. But level 11 was easy, level 10 less easy. Anyway, good luck, everybody. Get your skills up and your parameter up all the way, and let's level up.